I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Sorry for my absence. I was dealing with some health issues in the past week, and now I'm back in the saddle. I hope you enjoyed the last episode, which featured a conversation with Nick Cleveland Stout of the Quincy Institute on Israel's influence campaigns in the United States. On this edition of the show, we'll be talking to a top Democratic Party strategist, Maya Rupert, about the future of the Democratic Party. She has a new book out entitled The Real Ones: How to Disrupt the Hidden Ways Racism Makes Us Less Authentic. Before we get to that conversation, however, I want to remind you, the listener, that this show is almost entirely listener funded. So if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. Also, check out my one and only sponsor, Mike Swanson's wallstreetwindow.com. One more time, that's wallstreetwindow.com. Now, with that being said, let's get to the conversation with Maya Rupert. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm very, very happy to have on. She's a top political strategist that has worked on presidential campaigns for the Democratic Party. I'm speaking with Maya Rupert, author of the new book, The Real Ones. And we're going to talk about that first and foremost, and then I want to get into some things heading into the midterms and where the Democratic Party is right now. But how are you doing, Maya?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
So I'm really excited to be speaking with you, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your book. I believe it came out, did it come out back in February, right?
February, yes, it's been out for a bit now.
Okay, so it's called The Real Ones: How to Disrupt the Hidden Ways Racism Makes Us Less Authentic. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think authenticity, we talk about it so much, right? A lot in politics, but more broadly than that, there's this sense that, authenticity is this it's like a baseline requirement for like a good life. It is the absolute necessity for a politician. And very often I think that when we talk about authenticity, we are talking about actually 50 different things. And what it actually winds up feeling like sometimes is that we're not necessarily talking about anything, ironically, very real. Authenticity, we say that it's sort of an internal pursuit, right? I want to live my authentic life. But so much about what we say when we mean it is how other people are perceiving us, right? And basically the point of the book is to kind of grapple with this idea of authenticity, specifically around folks who have marginalized identities, people of color, women, people who maybe from a very young age learned how to be strategically inauthentic. And so there comes a point in life and a career when you're sort of looked around and asked to adopt a version of authenticity that very often doesn't actually feel very true to you. And that's what I wanted to explore with the book is, what are we asking for when we tell people to be authentic? Is it really about who you sort of truly are at your core? And if it's not, what are we really talking about when we talk about authenticity?
How would you tie that into what we see happening right now, just with regards to where the Democratic Party is at and where it needs to go? What do you want the book to accomplish for people that are sick and tired of Trump and want to build a movement that is going to change things in this country?
Right. Well, I think that what I'm hoping people bring from it is, very often when we assess candidates, we say, do they seem authentic? And very often that allows some candidates to get perceived as electable and other candidates to get perceived as not. And I don't think that actually helps us. I don't think that gets us better leaders, right? I think a really good example of this that we just saw sort of play out is the situation with Graham Plattner in Maine. So much of his early appeal was this idea that he struck people as authentic. Now, what was funny about it is a lot of the people that were so pushing this narrative that he's an authentic working class Maine guy who Maine voters are going to gravitate toward were not themselves working class Maine voters. They were people from out of state. They were people in, right? Like it wasn't as though this was an organic movement. This was something that was put on him. So what do we mean when we called Graham Plattner authentic? The more stories came out that undermined this image of him, it didn't seem to touch this underlying feeling that, but he's authentic. And if we ask for so much from people, you're never going to get regular people to run for office because he is just a regular, real guy. And the more the idea of him as this person was undone, it didn't touch this question of authenticity. So to me, that makes me ask, well, what are people really saying when they say he's authentic? Because it doesn't seem to mean that he has to honestly be an oyster farmer, because stories were coming out that maybe that's not really how he makes his money. It doesn't have to be that he is honestly working class, because stories are coming out that maybe that's not wholly true. What it really felt like people were saying is that he seemed like a normal white man. And if that's what we use as our like arbiter of authenticity, we are going to have a very difficult time electing candidates of color, women of any race, and we are going to have a very difficult time assessing what voters actually want. Because I don't think that what people needed was somebody cosplaying all of these things that we've told each other that voters need. Voters wanted somebody who was going to genuinely hold the positions that they held and was going to be able to excite voters. That does not have to come in the package that it was being sold to us as. And that's my fear, is that this obsession with authenticity masks a lot of stuff that makes someone actually inelectable. But it also gives us the impression that there are a lot of people who we could absolutely elect, that they will never appeal to a certain segment of voters. And that's what I want us to rethink.
I wanted to ask too, what are the lessons that you've learned from you worked on I believe it was Julián Castro's campaign.
Yes.
Can you talk about your experiences and how they've made you think about both uh, you know social justice politics, working in a movement, working politically? What lessons have you learned, and what lessons are you hoping to impart on the Democratic Party and just the American public?
I think, sorry. Yeah, when I worked for Julián Castro, I did not work in electoral politics at the time. My career had been in social justice movement work. And to me, those felt very separate at the time. And he was the first person I worked with where I said, I I get that you can be in electoral politics, but still be animated by the same things and issues that animate the folks in like movement work. And it was the first time I really got that it was like, oh, we can elect people with this kind of ethos. I feel like there was a shift in 2020 where people really started taking that seriously, and it was a really exciting moment. So for me, I feel like what I learned from that process, from my background in movement work and my experience working in electoral politics, is that people it these issues resonate with people. I think this artificial divide between social justice being kind of over here and the things that people consider like the bread and butter of politics being over here, and that you can't really meet them. You absolutely can. You need the right leaders to do it, and you need that for them, that connection to be genuine. One of the things that has scared me about the future of the Democratic Party is that I have heard too many discussions among people who say, that the party went too far culturally, and that in order to get back working class voters, we need to become more culturally conservative. And I think there became this like, that became some conventional wisdom that I think is fundamentally untrue. I think we very often assign to voters these very strict boxes that really only make sense to operatives. I think that most voters want to hear somebody speaking to families where they can feel like, I recognize that. Either that's me or that's people I know. And that doesn't require a level of cultural conservatism. That I think that's coming from fear. I think we have a moment right now where our political imaginations are possibly as wide as they've ever been. I don't want people to artificially draw boundaries around ourselves and say we can't go here or we can't go there. I want us to listen to voters, and voters are telling us that they are ready for a much more revolutionary approach to our politics. And I think we need to hear them and give it to them.
What do you think the challenges are for the Democratic Party right now and going forward into the midterms? And how do you think we can work through the challenges?
I would say, I mean, I think some of the biggest challenges are frankly just a lot of them are self-imposed. I think that we are limiting ourselves unnecessarily. I think that we have this sense that it's like there are some things you you can't do, you can't offer because I think that we're in a moment where what people are telling us is the status quo doesn't work for me. And just because, and I think the Democrats it's one of the things that has made the party, I think, successful in some ways, but I think it also holds us back in some ways, is that we tend to adhere more to institutions, right? Um, and I think that that means when the status quo exists, there's a lot of people who say, all right, well, we have a system. So if you want to upend the system, you have to show that your new idea is going to work. It's going to work 100% of the time. The problem is we are comparing it to a system that clearly doesn't work. So it's not as though we have a system that works and a new idea. We have a system that doesn't work and a new idea that might. And I think we have to shift our thinking. So that's how we're seeing it, because that's what our voters are telling us. The system doesn't work for me. And the longer we say, well, sure, but we can't do this and we can't do this, what we're saying is, I don't hear you telling me that the system doesn't work. I'm trying to convince you that no, 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 don't worry. Let's just get back to the system and I'll show you how it works for you. And I think it's harder to convince voters that they're wrong about their lived experience. It is easier to hear people and try to adjust. And it also happens to be a better way to govern.
What for you is the biggest example of, I guess, the Democratic Party moving in a different direction? And I guess where do you see like the biggest hope right now?
The biggest hope right now, let me think. I mean, I think that what we have seen in the special elections we've seen, in the off-cycle elections we've seen, are Democrats winning and winning big and overperforming in places where people keep telling us we can't win. So I find a lot of hope in that. I think that that means that people feel frustrated by where we are and they're ready and hungry for change. So I feel like there's an opportunity. That tells me there is a moment, and you don't get political moments like this every day, right? So I really think we've got to take advantage of it. I'm seeing things that were like considered fringe ideas not that long ago enter into the mainstream. Like we were having a real debate about whether or not $15 minimum wage could happen, 10 years ago, if it could happen in 10 years. And now people are saying, really, in order to fix the problem, we need to start talking about 20. People are talking about like genuinely raising wages in a way that we have not seen before. We're having real conversations about whether or not there should be some working class exemption of income taxes. And I think people have different ideas about, do we start exempting people from tax? But what we're saying is we have to start focusing our politics on regular people. And for a very long time, that was sort of like, I mean, yeah, it's really hard for a lot of people, but that's just the way things are. And now finally people are saying it doesn't have to be the way things are. It doesn't have to be that our politics have to overemphasize people with money and corporations. If it's possible, if we could not imagine ourselves saying we're going to go to war and we're not going to pay for it, then we can say I'm not going to imagine a world where people are sleeping on the street. Like it's really just a change in what are we willing to allow to happen? And I feel like we have a moment where we're starting to say, where are the places where we draw the line and say this far, no further? this far no further. And how come none of them are in favor of us, of working people, of regular people? So I think we're like, I don't know. I see a real moment here, and I just don't want us to waste it.
I wanted to ask as well, I, I don't want you to necessarily comment on internal divisions within the Democratic Party, but how can it's a coalition. You know, you have
Yeah.
people from independent organizations that share some goals with maybe the Democratic Party mainstream, but don't always agree with the party's strategy. So I'm thinking of DSA and whatnot. Um,
Yeah.
how can the coalition work when you have so many like differing sort of perspectives and viewpoints, and they clash sometimes?
Absolutely. But I think a coalition can only work that way. Um, you need a robust coalition to get elected in this country. And that means you're going to have times where there are clashes. I think we're seeing right now the rise of the DSA and DSA candidates who are demanding a different direction for the party. There is going to be some conflict with people who have been a part of an establishment that's going to fight back against that. I think that's good. I think it strengthens the party. I think the worst thing we can do is out of this like kind of superficial idea of like we want unity, say, stop fighting, we can't do this, because it'll weaken the party. And 5 years from now, it won't just be tensions within the party. It'll be, well, I'm not going to vote for the Democrat once the Democrat becomes the nominee because we're just so far it ends. I would rather us have these tense, uncomfortable, but ultimately really valuable fights. I think it's important that we are trying to figure out, does the Democratic Party want to, fundamentally be an anti-corporate party? Do we want to start demanding that our candidates turn down corporate PAC money? Do we want to make sure that candidates are turning down APAC money? What is going to be our position moving forward on support for Israel? Are we going to say genocide if something is a genocide? Are these our values? And are we willing to stand by our values? Those are important questions. They're questions, and I'm glad we're asking them now because I don't want to hear them only get asked during a presidential election when the stakes are so high and then we're having fights about, well, you have to vote for who we have in the primary. We should be having these fights right now. Because we should be getting to a place and then we should listen to voters. And if people are saying, this is a hard line for us, then that should guide our nominating process. That should guide who we're putting forward. And I think that's valuable. I've seen a debate among some people that don't think that the party should have a platform. Um, and I don't think that I understand where people are coming from with that. I think that a party without a platform, without a policy platform, it's going to be very difficult to say that we have a cohesive message that isn't just anti-Trump. And as soon as Trump is no longer the nominee, I think we will see the limits of a party with no platform. I think we should have a platform. I don't think it's the job of the Democratic Party with like no candidate in mind to say this will be our legislative priority on day one, but I do think that we should have some things that we hold to. And and the debate we're having internally right now, I don't think it should have us shy away from taking strong stands. I think that's what gets us out of this.
I also wanted to ask you what you make of the I would call it like a surge of economic populism that is I think really rising right now, especially in light of the way that I would say Trump, despite sort of playing populist, hasn't been very populist.
No, Donald Trump did such an interesting thing with, the way, like it was, and it's so funny because I feel like I remember so many pundits saying the Democrats need to do what Trump did. I mean, he's the one talking to poor and working class voters. Where's the Democratic Party? Blah, blah, blah. And it was like, well, yeah, he's lying to them. He's lying to them. That's what he's doing. He said, hey, I will do all of this stuff and I'll do it for you. And to the other base of the Republican Party, people who are used to the party being beholden to the wealthiest, being beholden to corporations. He said, don't worry. And then when the rubber met the road, he consistently abandoned the working class base that really elected him. So yes, I think he was pretending to be an economic populist. What he was really being was a white racial politics identitarian, right? I mean, he was just telling people, but every problem that you're dealing with is because of immigrants. It's because of this community. It's because of this, he stoked fear and racial resentment, but he doesn't have any ideas for people. What's interesting to me is that some of the same pundits that were telling Democrats they need to hijack some of Trump's ability to talk to these communities. Well, the progressive version of that kind of populism is democratic socialism. That is the answer to it. It's just there's a policy agenda attached to it. You don't just say, hey, working class people, we're with you. You say, working class people, we're with you. And all of us are together. And there are very few people who benefit from some of these policies. So let's come together and make it so your life is affordable. Make it so your wages are high enough because that's not impossible, but it will cost some corporations some of the money that they currently get to keep in profit. But the world is not going to stop turning, and they won't even stop being incredibly wealthy people. We're just going to try to balance the scales some. That is the progressive version of what Trump did. But it's also it being seen through to fruition. You actually have to do the things. So I feel like to some extent, what we're seeing is the answer to Trumpism, because the answer to Trumpism is not ignoring the people that he brought in. It's saying that guy is never going to be with you, but here's what it actually looks like to look out for working class people. It is a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-income level movement that says we are all better when we are all better.
I hope this isn't too strange of a question. I'm trying to find the right way to word it, but
Okay.
I saw in the Washington Post today there was an article uh, called, or it was about a poll over the term
Mhm.
democratic socialist, and many Americans saying, well, that term scares me, or I wouldn't consider voting for someone that labels themselves that. But what was interesting in the article was it was saying how no one could really agree on what that word meant.
No.
Do you think some people are focusing too much on? I think there's a lot of talk about democratic socialism and economic populism and sort of buzzwords, but not the policies we want. Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, absolutely. I think that if we didn't label something socialism or democratic socialism, and you see it, right? People will say, I hate socialism, but I want Obamacare. People will say, I don't like you have a reaction to the idea of socialism, but the fact of it is very often just it's a robust social safety net that people actually have a very positive reaction to. So I have, some people don't consider themselves. I think a great example of this, Elizabeth Warren has always said she's like, I'm not a socialist, I'm a capitalist, right? But she is putting forward a vision of a country that has a robust social safety net, generates real competition between businesses, so is very strong on antitrust and anti-monopolistic practices, and would be in favor of people over corporations, consumers who don't want to get taken advantage of, right? You don't have to be a socialist to get there. So if that doesn't work for people, like I know for some people, they're proud of it. They're like, I'm a democratic socialist and that's who I am and that's my political home. Great. I think there will be some candidates who will probably have the same aversion a lot of voters have to the word. The issue is not what you call it, the issue is what you're trying to do for people.
I wanted to ask as well because I don't know if you would share this view, but sometimes I've gotten frustrated with the Democratic Party at times because I feel like sometimes the Democratic Party hasn't touted some of its victories. So
Yes.
what I mean by that is I'm big on the antitrust issue, and I
Yes.
thought Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor were doing incredible work during the
Yes.
Biden administration. There's multiple stories I could go through. I think there was a lot of great things being done with the National Labor Review Board under Biden. These were things that really got me excited, to be honest, but I feel like it wasn't touted by the Democratic Party. What do you think maybe do you think there's an issue with like messaging and pointing out the victories at times?
I think a couple of things happen. One is you just listed a bunch of things that you're very interested in, and most people would be like, that is so far from my radar. Because the truth is, people don't have a relationship with the National Labor Review Board. They don't have a relationship with like the Consumer Financial Protection Board. They have a relationship with, well, I get, fraud stuff from my credit card company, and then I put my information in, and then my stuff gets stolen, and my credit card company hasn't paid me back yet. They have that reaction. And I think sometimes we get, because there is an effort, and I think genuinely it's important that it comes from a good intention. People want to be very specific about what it is. It's like the National Labor Review Board does this, it doesn't do this. Or like, it's like you want to be very, it's like yeah, it's kind of like a court, but not really. So don't think of it like a case law, but it's kind of like case law. We want to be so specific about things that it winds up feeling very esoteric when it's not. It's like this stuff is the least esoteric thing ever. It applies to each and every single one of us. So I think there is a genuine question of how do you take very like seemingly academic issues, but that have real world consequences, and focus on the real world consequences at the expense of the academic piece. And that might make some of us chafe at, wait, is that exactly correct? Or is that the way you say it? And I think recognizing that one of the least favorite things I always hear in politics, people are like, people don't vote on policy. People vote on policy all the time. They don't vote on your white paper, but they do vote on what you're going to do for them. So I feel like sometimes we have to take a step back from what I think some of us enjoy, which is like kind of the nerding out on being like, this is so interesting and here's why, and make it accessible for people. And I don't think that our emphasis has always been there. And I think that there's a very noble reason for it. It's almost like this, we almost have an allergy to, it's like you want to make sure that it's completely accurate, and it's not bombastic, and it's not like overplaying. It's like it's trying to be the anti-Trump before Trump was even a thing, right? I think this has always been a hard thing about the Democratic Party. When you want to be very accurate and you want to make sure that you're not overselling anything you're doing, you put your emphasis on things, you can make something huge seem really small. And I do think we have to dial that. I'm not saying start lying, but there's a dial, and I think we're all in one direction, and I think we need to even it out a bit.
Do you think though that I guess I think though that Democrats need to push that they are going to be the party of Main Street rather than,
Yes.
yeah. And I think sometimes that's gotten lost at times in terms of messaging. Yeah.
100% it's gotten lost. And I think some of it is that there was a shift, right? At some point, the Democratic Party and I think progressivism in general became the cultural elite. It used to be that the idea was, the Democratic Party was sort of for everyone. And instead, it started looking more like it was, you know, you went to school in certain place, you went to college, you got educated a certain way, not just, it was like there was a certain kind of way you were a Democrat. And with that, we lost the kind of like cultural fluency that made people feel like you're just like me. And with some of that, there came a little bit of scoldiness, right? The Democratic Party got a little bit like, in order to be with us, you've got to say X, Y, and Z. And that then became the identity of it. So people stopped associating Democrats with a more populist idea. It was elite, it was coastal, it was certain people. I always think it's important to mention that didn't come out of nowhere, right? At the same time that the Democratic Party got labeled more like, insular, was at the same time that the Republican Party was becoming much more like embracing a lot more fringe elements. And we were seeing a rise of like the alt-right. We are seeing a rise of neo-Nazism, right? It's like sometimes I want us to remember, because I will criticize the Democratic Party. I do think that we have gotten a little bit, it does sometimes feel like you have to know the special handshake to get in, but it's like the Democratic Party got more smug at the same time that the Republican Party got closer to Nazis, right? Like those things should not be treated like the same thing. Like
Yeah,
like lefties. Sorry, go
not to
ahead.
not to interrupt you, but I jokingly tell people sometimes I like Jon Stewart, but I'm not sure the entire smugification of politics has always been a good thing.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. I think that's right. And that is something we need to work on. But I do think that there is sometimes when we're critiquing the left for that, we forget the context, that it wasn't just because we're especially smug, we became this. It became harder and harder to meet in the middle with a party that was becoming more and more radicalized. And so I think both of those things happen. Now, the Democratic Party needs to reverse that piece of it, because it does. It does not benefit anyone for people to feel like I'm aligned with you, but I feel like I'm not welcome. That is not a good thing. But there has to be an appreciation for, yes, there was an effort to make it feel like some people weren't welcome, and a lot of those people were Nazis. Like like that move can't be separated out from the move to the right.
If you have time for one more question, I just wanted to ask about the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on Louisiana's congressional redistricting map. I know that was back in April, but I feel like that's a story that we still need to be talking about. And I mean, where do we go from here?
Look, there's no way around it. That is going to be devastating. Um, Watching the Voting Rights Act get gutted was so jarring. And I feel like, I mean, it was jarring in the way that losing Roe versus Wade was jarring, but I feel like people understand abortion rights a little more. I think we are going to have to see Black leadership, congressional Black leadership decimated for people to understand what this really means. We are going, it's going to be bad. It's going to be really, really bad. And I think it is recoverable, but I think that we have to be realistic that in order to change what needs changing, there is a rogue Supreme Court. There is an illegitimate Supreme Court that got rid of a, a super precedent constitutional right to bodily autonomy, and then got rid of the Voting Rights Act, which is basically how we have the like multiracial society that we have right now. Like that was an integral piece of it, and it is gone. There is no way from this that isn't unpacking the court, reversing what Mitch McConnell did when he stole a Supreme Court seat, and making it so we have a Supreme Court that is actually legitimate, which we do not have right now. And we're seeing the impact. An illegitimate Supreme Court dilutes voting power, disenfranchises Black voters, and deprives women of bodily autonomy. That's the result of an illegitimate Supreme Court. And I think we have to talk about it. We have to yell it from the rooftop. We have to make it clear that everything that is coming from this is the result of absolutely criminal machinations that should have been treated like it in real time. We had a Supreme Court seat stolen, and since then, every move that has been made has been illegitimate, and we're seeing the impact of it. And I think that it is one of the, we have to say it with a full throat and stand by it. We have to have unpacking the Supreme Court on the agenda the next time we have any power. There is no way up through this without being able to do that. There's no way that we can repair the damage that's been done by losing the Voting Rights Act without repassing a Voting Rights Act, but having a Supreme Court that's going to stand by it. And by the way, that means absolutely no gerrymandering, not just racial gerrymandering. We cannot allow political gerrymandering and pretend that doesn't immediately mean you're allowed to racially gerrymander. It's the same thing.
Well, I want to thank you, Maya, for coming on Parallax Views. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I want to give you a chance to plug the book again, and maybe tell my listeners, what do you hope they get out of this conversation we've had for the past half hour? What's the biggest takeaway you want people to have?
Absolutely. So yes, the book again is The Real One, Real Ones. It's available now all over the place. Check it out if you are interested in authenticity, and especially if you have ever heard somebody talk about authenticity and felt like, honestly, it felt like a little bit of an alienating conversation for you. This book is 1000% for you. And I would say from this conversation, I hope people take away that we really are in a special political moment right now. It feels scary and it feels relentless. And I get that. And I feel it sometimes too. But it doesn't just happen that you have a moment where it feels like people are really willing to do a reset and say, we're open to the big ideas. We're open to electing the people that are saying, I get that this doesn't work for you. Why don't we try this? We cannot waste this opportunity. So I hope people feel honestly inspired from this conversation. I hope people go out and vote at the local, state, federal level, volunteer for campaigns, get involved. There's never been a more important moment for all of us to be involved, because we're actually seeing what I think is a revolution in our politics to reorient it around regular people. So we need you more than ever to be involved in this process, because otherwise we're going to recreate the same systems.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Fabian, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Aaron, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Nobody, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.